The 2012 has 21 millimeter lug nuts, 5 of them. So just use a regular cross and a torque wrench to tighten them up. But I always loosen them when I'm on the ground, so the friction of the wheel on the ground. Once I take it off, it's impossible really to get these undone. So these are already loose. I'm just going to take these off, put the tire up, flip it under there. So here we are. This is the right aft caliper right here, and the right aft disc brake right here. There's a lot of rust. That's from the salt on the road. It's also because these brake rotors don't have paint on them, and that helps prevent corrosion. So the brakes that I got at first did have paint on them. However, they were centric brakes off of Amazon, which actually said they fit the car on Amazon, but don't in person. It's a common theme. They're not the right size, so I just got some simple Duralast rotors from Autozone. So what we're going to do first is we're going to take these guys off. These are the caliper slide pins. You pop these guys off right here. This is a rubber boot. Just like this. That is a 7mm bolt and Allen key. I use an Allen key attached to a socket for the best results on this. What you're going to do here is, if you see here, this car doesn't have them covered. Sometimes they have them covered. This is a slider pin that threads into here. And that slides because as your brake pads wear, the caliper needs to move closer in. So we'll take the caliper off. We'll leave the caliper bracket on for right now. Also note here, this is your e-brake cable right here. And this, very important line, this is your brake line. You do not want to put any stress in there, so we're going to use a coat hanger and hang it off the top. Here on those hooks. I'm also going to remove these clips to get the brake pads loose. And we'll be taking our brake pads out and replacing these too. This is the 7mm hex head on a foot-long torque wrench, right there. Now we're just unwinding this guy. We've gotten all the threaded portion out. Then you can see that coming out. This looks in a relatively good condition, but we'll clean it up and add some caliper grease to this and reinstall it. So you can see here we have a 7mm head right there. Here. Boom. Just take this right out. And there's the second one. Again, in relatively good condition. Next, we're just going to pry these loose. These are the brake caliper clips. See that? They pop out. You got to be careful when you pop them out, just that they don't fly in your face. The flathead screwdriver will work. And there you go. So a couple taps here. Got this guy free. Again, this is your caliper mount bolt right here. This is your actual caliper. So we're keeping the caliper here for bolting purposes, because the two bolts that hold this mounting bracket on are in the way, and you have to hit either your brake line or your parking brake cable if you're going to do that. So we're going to lift this out of the way first, and then remove these. Here's your piston with your spiral locking feature, and that'll allow you to recompress your piston with a special tool. But for that, we're going to hang this from up here so that we don't put any strain on the brake line, because that would be bad. So here's your caliper, and it's hung right here from a hanger. There's many ways to do this. This is how I did it, but again, that brake line's got plenty of slack on it, so you're not actually hanging it off there. Again, right side, left side, a little bit different, but there's usually a hook up there that you could use, and that's good. So now here are our really old, rusty, crusty brake pads. There's still plenty of pad on here, so theoretically I didn't have to do the job. Had the time, figured I'd do it now, before the fall. Again, plenty of pad still on there. Anyway, this guy hung right here. As I said, this is your caliper mounting bracket. And this guy here is bolted on by two 14mm bolts, one here and one here. They're very clearly available for you to torque right now, but before, they actually hit the brake line. So this is why I took this off first before I even tried to take these two off. So I'm going to hit these with my 1-foot torque wrench, because these guys are usually torqued 50 foot-pounds and have thread locker and rust and whatever else on there, so they're going to take a little bit of effort. So I broke these off one. They were a little bit over 50. They were probably closer to 100 foot-pounds on the torque wrench to break just by hand. And you got two down here. Both these are broken off, and that's it. And I got these 14mm caliper bracket bolts off. So now look at that. We got, this is our caliper bracket. We're going to clean it up with a little wire brush and mount bolts are here, and right here where the slider pins come in, right there. Now the rotor should technically slide right off, never does. Usually the biggest problem for people. Usually what I do, I start off with a ball peen hammer, tap it right around where the nuts are, so one back here, one on the bottom right here, and then one on the side, just like when you're torquing. And that should get some vibration in there, but I guarantee you that that's not going to get this thing off. So, we got to go to the real plan. So we're called the real plan. These are just some 3/8 bolts. Again, this is a 14mm socket that comes through here on 10mm bolts, if I'm not mistaken. And so technically these are a little small, but these guys are nice and long, and what you could do is put a washer down here to react against here so you don't gall up this bracket on the main frame. And put a bolt here and screw, and use this giant thing as a jacking screw. Now, you don't want to bend this, so you got to be careful when you do that, but this guy will put the right pressure on the right amount of the rotor. Before I do that, though, I use PB Blaster to soak everything, and that gives you some initial resistance to all that grease coming off. So you can see right here, we got the screw, we got a washer in there, and we got a bolt, and it's against the rotor. So plan not to use these rotors again because we don't want to gall them up. But essentially, turn this, and you turn the bottom one, and you use a 14mm, or sorry, I got a 3/8 inch bolt on here, so I'm going to hold that and torque this with my socket wrench, and before you know it, you're done. You'll hear a little chink, and it'll pop right off. And if you look at that, everything's right off. So it's all fixed. Now this is pop right off on the bottom one. No bending or any motion to this bracket. You do have to be careful not to over torque, but it's really rust welds in a couple spots here between the hub frame and the back of the rotor. So here's our good old rusty rotor. You can see in the back, completely rusted out. Typical of Boston. Once again, great city. A lot of rust. Here's our rotor. You know, it's not really that bad. The other side, when I replaced it, had a little bit more dust. We're still going to clean this up with a wire brush. On this nice smooth surface right here, we're going to put some anti-seize on there so that the next rotor doesn't lock. So we got a nice wire brush here, just standard from AutoZone. Use this to clean. Here, I get all any rust out of here really quickly. This guy's covered in an oil coating when it's in the bag, so we're going to use some brake clean. We got right here. We're going to spray all surfaces that are coated in oil. We're going to wipe it with a rag. That's just to make sure that there's no oil where you want to brake, so I'm braking on a good mix. So here's our Antiseize Compound right here. We're going to just apply a little bit of cream to each of these surfaces before we slap the rotor on. So now that we have that Antiseize applied, take our handy dandy brake rotor right here, slap it on. Now one trick that everybody uses, that I also use, is to just use one of the lug nuts, and that's so that you could keep this thing secured while you're doing all of your other work, to put everything back together. I'm wiring that guy down, finger tight. And just make sure that you have something holding that rotor on there. It will wobble until you have the caliper set around it. So the next step here is take your caliper bracket, slap it back on. It comes back on here, as I explained earlier, around, and put it back on. Again, two 14mm socket bolts, put those on, torque them up to 50 foot-pounds. Before you do any of that, you can notice where the pads go, which is in this little spot here. I like to use the wire brush to clean these out. A lot of rust built up in here. These are cast iron, so think of a griddle, rusts out, a lot of material. Recommend removing it. The key element here, these Caliper Bracket Bolts you can only order from Mazda. I called everywhere in the city. Nobody has them. So you want to take extra good care of them. They're a little rusted. Honestly, would love to get new ones. These are kind of rusty, but they'll still work. You want to put some thread locker on the threads because this is a high vibration area, and red lacquer blue isn't permanent, but it helps you avoid vibration. It's also removable, so it's just an extra bit of added protection from vibration. These guys have the red lacquer blue on the part that actually goes into the caliper bracket, so be ready to go. They're now torqued on, these guys right here, right back where we started at 50 foot-pounds. Next step, compressing the caliper. This guy's pretty easy, so again, I recommend going to AutoZone, picking up one of these. These two guys fit into these two holes. Pretty simple. So have your little piece right here, slides right in. This is a backing plate to react the force against this front part of the caliper. And you just want to spiral this in until it clicks and doesn't move anymore. We'll shove brake fluid back in. Just remember that your reservoir should not be overflowing, so you want to go open your hood, pop that reservoir cap over, make sure that you're not overflowing brake fluid, that stuff. But now we're using the famed caliper compression tool. Go down the back. Notice there's a spring here. That's how you tell between a rear pad and a forward pad. Oh, sorry, an inboard pad and an outboard pad. So this spring allows it to ride inside this part of the caliper. It sits in here. Springs there. Antiseize. Both brake pads, the outboard and the inboard. Inboard with the spring, outboard without one. And notice I got an anti-seize on both, and notice they're both sandwiched on the caliper mounting bracket, and they're sandwiching the rotor. That's exactly why we want it. We got a cylinder that's cranked in all the way, it's flush, nice and pushed in. We're just going to slide this on top. There we go. So now it's back. Now we're going to put in the 7mm hex guide pins. They're looking okay, but we need to dabble the sides with the caliper lubricant. Put some on the sides of each one, make sure it's nice and clean, and then slide them back in and torque them to 20 foot-pounds. That should lock our caliper in, and then we will put the retaining clips on the pads. So, now we got everything installed, torqued, ready to go. Last thing to do is put this clip spring on. All you got to do is wedge the outer part against this piece right here, and then you put these inner things through here. You just need a flathead screwdriver to help, and then you're all set to put everything back together.